The wind whispered down the narrow mountain pass, curling around ancient stones and hollow crevices like it remembered every name carved there 1,000 years ago. Snow fell softly at first, then faster, as if the mountain itself exhaled cold into the lungs of the earth. A single figure moved through the storm, boots crunching in rhythm, carrying more than just gear on their back, carrying truth. Dr. Elias Tren had no business being up here. Not at his age, not with his heart condition, and certainly not after what happened in the Andes. But this was different. The satellite scan hadn't just found another geological anomaly. It had found a signal. A pulse. Rhythmic. Mathematical. Too perfect to be natural, and far, far too old. He wiped his goggles, but the snow only smeared across the lens. He didn't need to see. He remembered every twist of this forgotten path from when he was a boy, when his grandmother used to tell stories by the fire about the sleepers beneath the stone, and the men who came from stars but wore the faces of wolves. Back then he had thought they were just stories. Parables wrapped in mystery, designed to scare children into sleeping early and staying away from the mountains. But now he wasn't so sure. The signal had matched the rhythms of a lullaby his grandmother used to hum. No one else noticed it, but he did. It was etched into his memory, like a whisper stitched into the lining of his childhood. That was why he'd come. The cave was still there, untouched, hidden beneath a slab of stone that looked like any other. But Elias knelt, brushed away the frost, and tapped on the side. Hollow. Just like he remembered. His fingers, swollen from the cold, found the notch. The slab rolled with a low moan of stone over stone, revealing the passage. His breath caught. Not from fear. Not yet. But from something older than that. Reverence. He stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across walls engraved with spirals, claws, and eyes. Humanity's myths, he thought. But these weren't carved by human hands. Deep inside, deeper than he remembered ever going, the air changed. It felt aware. His flashlight flickered. He tapped it. The beam returned. But now it reflected off something metallic. A panel? He moved closer. No dust. No rust. And the symbols etched into the surface, curved, delicate, flowing, were identical to those on the jawbone discovered under the Sumerian temple last year. A jawbone that wasn't human. He raised his recorder, voice trembling. This is Dr. Elias Tren. If anyone finds this, please listen carefully. The stories, they weren't metaphors. They weren't allegories. They were warnings. He pressed his palm against the panel. Nothing. Then, a vibration. The stone beneath his feet shimmered. He stumbled back as the wall split apart like petals blooming from a steel flower. Warm air rushed past him, filled with a scent he couldn't place. Not metallic. Not sulfur. Almost sweet. And then he heard it. A voice. Not through his ears. But inside his head. You are late. He dropped the recorder. His knees buckled. The air shimmered, and from the light emerged a figure. Vaguely human in shape, but too tall. Too perfect. Its eyes were glowing slits, not angry, just ancient. You're real, Elias whispered. The figure tilted its head. You remembered the song. Few do. Elias nodded, trembling. My grandmother, she used to sing it. She heard it in a dream. Passed down through blood. You call them myths. We called them containment protocols. Elias blinked. What were you containing? The light dimmed. The figure stepped back. It wakes. Suddenly the floor trembled. Stone cracked. A pulse, like a heartbeat, echoed from the deep. You must warn them. The figure raised a hand and pressed it to Elias's chest. And then it was gone. The cave darkened. His flashlight lay dead on the ground. He stumbled out into the snow, heart racing. But above him the sky had changed. A second moon now hung there. And it was growing. Halfway across the world, in a military command center buried beneath Arctic ice, alarms screamed across the chamber. Unidentified object in geosynchronous orbit. A technician yelled. Is it natural? Someone asked. No, sir. It's decelerating. The general in charge, a man who had seen more lies than truth in his career, narrowed his eyes. Tell me it's a satellite. It's not human. Then came the second alert. From the Vatican. And then from the Indian Ministry of Antiquities. And then the Smithsonian. All three had received the same symbol, burned into their private servers. A spiral surrounded by 8 eyes. The myths. They were never just stories. At the same time, in a classroom in a dusty village near the Caucasus Mountains, a boy dropped his pencil. He wasn't drawing anymore. His eyes had rolled back. His voice changed. And from his mouth came a message. The lock has failed. The eaters are stirring. The teacher froze, chalk falling from her hand. Outside, crows began to scream. In orbit, cameras aboard the International Moon Research Station captured the surface of the second moon shifting. It wasn't a moon at all. It was a vessel. And it was opening. On a small fishing boat in the Bering Sea, an old man dropped his net and stared up. He began to weep. Just like my mother said, he whispered. Behind him, etched into his back since birth, was a birthmark shaped like the spiral. He had always believed it was a curse. Now he knew it was a beacon. The myths were maps. Each culture had preserved a piece. Atlantis, the Bifrost, the Great Serpent, the Watchers, the Chariots of Fire. Warnings. Stories humanity had turned into bedtime tales. But they had always been true. We had just forgotten. And now, the stories remembered us. Aboard the research ship Asteria orbiting Titan, Lieutenant Kara Voss sat in silence. The signal they picked up wasn't a language. It was a memory. A planetary-scale memory. She reviewed the spectrograph again. The same spiral. The same rhythm. And in the static, she heard her mother's voice. Except her mother had died 10 years ago. She grabbed the console. Earth Command, this is Asteria. We've received transmission code Omega X. I repeat, Omega X. Request immediate protocol unlock and memory vault authorization. It's happening. Back on Earth, the message caused panic. Because Omega X wasn't just a code. It was the last failsafe. To open the vault under the Vatican. The one labeled, Myth Protocol, Human Origin Alpha. Deep beneath that ancient city, a man in robes walked down marble stairs few knew existed. He unlocked a door that hadn't been opened in 600 years. Inside was a room full of scrolls. Metallic. Unaging. Written in a language never deciphered. He pulled one scroll open. It glowed. And across the surface appeared a single sentence. They will come not for war but for harvest. Back in the cave, Elias coughed blood. The energy had taken something from him. He staggered out, barely able to move. But before collapsing, he whispered a message into the satellite transmitter he had dropped earlier. Just one word. Run. Then everything behind him lit up in white. A tower of light erupted from the mountain's heart. And the wind began to scream. Across the world, ancient ruins began to respond. Pyramids emitted signals. Stone circles began to hum. Paintings that had flaked and crumbled for centuries reformed under invisible hands. And in every child who had ever dreamed of monsters under the bed, something awoke. Not fear. Recognition. Because the myths weren't made to frighten. They were made to prepare. And high above Earth, in that opening vessel, a figure stepped forward. Not metal. Not flesh. Something between. Its face was a mirror. Its voice carried through space without sound. The seal is broken. All across the planet, those born with the mark began to feel a tug. As if being summoned. And from the corners of forgotten books, old tongues began to stir. Not dead languages. Sleeping ones. And Earth, so noisy, so full of war and life and ignorance, finally grew silent. Not from peace. But anticipation. In the last seconds before the light consumed the mountain, Elias opened his eyes. He saw them. Standing in the light. Shapes from old dreams. Wings like obsidian. Eyes like burning suns. But they weren't angry. Not yet. They were waiting. And in the stillness he finally understood. The myths weren't stories. They were instructions. And humanity had forgotten how to read them. Then everything went black. The smoke hadn't cleared for hours. Emergency services scrambled to reach the collapsed mountain range, but their helicopters couldn't fly near the blast zone. The magnetic interference was too strong. Everything electronic fried as soon as it got close. Drones stopped midair and dropped like stones. Pilots blacked out. One of them swore he heard singing, like an old cradle song, right before the instruments went dead. Elias Tren was officially declared missing. His last transmission, just a single gasping word, sent shivers through every listening station across the globe. Run. The word was played on loop at the Global Emergency Response HQ. Analysts listened to it over and over, trying to extract meaning, metadata, any signature in the background noise. There wasn't much. Just snow. Wind. And something under it. A vibration. Too low for the ear but enough to make stomachs churn. That was when the secondary signal emerged. Not from Earth. From orbit. The thing that had been mistaken for a second moon was still there. Still silent. But now it had started to rotate. No transmission. No lights. No obvious propulsion. Just turning. Slow. Patient. As if it was waiting for Earth to do something first. Or remember something it had forgotten. Commander Ilara Miles watched from the edge of her station's viewport, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the giant structure overhead. Her ship, the Ascent, was one of 3 defense-class vessels with clearance to launch kinetic countermeasures. But none of them had been ordered to fire. Not yet. She didn't want to be the one to provoke something they didn't understand. "Any updates from ground intel?" she asked. "Negative, Commander," her second replied. "Mountain range still unapproachable. Seismic sensors went offline 20 minutes ago. And, another thing. The Vatican's Ancient Archives Division just went dark." Ilara turned slowly. "What do you mean dark?" "I mean the entire archive building vanished from satellite. No debris, no heat signature. Like it was never there." Ilara rubbed her forehead. She hadn't slept in 20 hours. The Earth was holding its breath and no one knew why. But the signals from orbit were becoming more complex now, patterns forming. Repeating symbols. Visual data broadcast across all frequencies. Spirals. Winks. Things that didn't match any known language, but still felt familiar. She sat down slowly and whispered to herself. "They're not trying to talk to us. They're trying to remind us." Half a world away, in a quiet town near Kyoto, an elderly woman named Aiko stood in front of her mirror brushing her long silver hair. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't know why. She'd been humming the same tune for hours. The same lullaby her mother once sang to her. One she hadn't thought about in decades. The exact melody playing through the Earth's seismic bandwaves now. She looked at the old pendant hanging around her neck, black stone, shaped like a spiral, given to her by her grandmother. The warmth of it now pulsed against her chest. The stories, the poems, the quiet warnings told in whispers before bedtime, they weren't legends. They were instructions. And they'd been passed down in song. She walked outside into the cold evening, the cherry trees blowing in eerie silence. The wind had stopped, but the air still moved, like something massive breathing just beyond sight. She looked up. The moon wasn't in the sky anymore. It had shifted. Now it sat directly above the Pacific. It was choosing. Back in the command center beneath Greenland's ice shelf, where classified research had been quietly conducted for decades, Dr. Lena Rourke stared at the artifact that had refused to do anything for 23 years. It was a black slab, almost weightless, humming faintly now for the first time since its discovery in Siberia. The spiral on its surface had ignited with dull golden light. Her assistant backed away. "What's it doing?" "I think it's waking up," Lena said, not looking away. "It's sinking." "With what?" She didn't answer. Because she knew. It was sinking with the thing in orbit. And that meant one thing. This wasn't the first time it had come. This had happened before. Long ago. Karavas, still aboard Asteria, stared at the ancient holographic scroll pulsing above the communications deck. It had taken the onboard AI hours to decrypt the first lines. And now she saw it clearly. The Watchers are not gods. They are gardeners. Their silence is not mercy. She didn't know what it meant, but the pieces kept falling into place. All the myths, the pyramids, the rituals. Even the child in the Caucasus who spoke in tongues not heard in 10,000 years. It was happening everywhere. At the same time. Not an invasion. Something deeper. A return. In a refugee camp on the outskirts of Istanbul, where displaced families huddled under plastic tarps and shared fires, a boy drew circles in the dirt. He didn't speak often. The trauma had taken his words. But today he spoke. To no one in particular. They were here before. But we locked them out. We sang the gate shut. An old woman nearby froze. "Who told you that, child?" The boy looked up. "My blood remembers." A dog barked in the distance. Then silence. The boy began to hum. And one by one the others joined him. The same melody. No one remembered learning it. But somehow they all knew. Back in the remains of the mountain, where Elias Tren had vanished, something stirred under the rubble. A hand. Well, shaking. He wasn't dead. Not yet. Buried under stone and ice, barely able to breathe, he blinked through blood and frost. He had seen things no human was meant to. But one image burned brightest in his mind. The figure in the light. It wasn't alien. It wasn't monstrous. It looked like us. Older. Tired. But human. Almost. And it had told him one truth before vanishing. We are what you become if you forget your place in the song. He didn't know what that meant yet. But the pain in his chest, like fire and glass, told him he had brought something back. Something buried in memory. In blood. The myths were real. But worse than that, they were incomplete. Only fragments had survived. Humanity had been left with puzzle pieces. and no warning about what would happen if the song was ever forgotten. Now it was being remembered too late. The containment was failing. And the gods of old? They weren't here to help. In an underground archive beneath the Egyptian desert, long sealed by both sand and bureaucracy, an archaeologist named Sammy broke through a stone barrier no one had opened in 4,000 years. Behind it was a chamber dry as bone, with walls covered in what looked like musical notation. Not hieroglyphics. Not language. Just flowing lines and marks, a song. He brushed the dust aside and stared in disbelief. It was the same melody from the broadcast. A song etched in stone before civilization had writing. He whispered to his colleague, "What if these weren't warnings about gods or monsters? What then? What if they were the instructions to hold them back?" His colleague paled. "And we forgot the words." Sammy stood in silence. "We didn't just forget," he said softly. "We buried them. We were told to forget." In the mountains of Chile, another child with a spiral mark on her hand began to glow faintly as she slept. Her parents panicked, thinking it was radiation. But she wasn't in pain. Her lips moved, whispering something in a language they didn't recognize. The local priest was called. He listened. And wept. "It's the first tongue," he said. "No one has spoken it since Eden." The vessel above Earth finally pulsed with light. A wave of color spread across the sky like a second dawn. Planes lost altitude. Power grids failed. Satellites rebooted mid-orbit. People all over the world stared upward, not with fear but with awe. It was beautiful, terrible, inevitable, like a memory returning to a mind too long asleep. And as the light passed through cities, through jungles, through deserts and oceans, those with the blood memory, the old mark, began to move. Some walked into the streets, humming. Some collapsed in tears. Some stood frozen, eyes open wide, as if seeing something behind reality itself. It wasn't possession. It was awakening. Not everyone could hear the song. But those who did, understood. The stories we told our children, about winged watchers, about beasts beneath the sea, about the sky turning red and the earth weeping, those weren't fiction. They were instructions carved into the soul of our species. Instructions for survival. Instructions for war. And the first seal had already broken. Deep in the Arctic, the old man with the spiral birthmark had taken off his gloves. He looked at his hand for a long time, then pulled an old leather pouch from his coat. Inside was a sliver of black stone. He pressed it to his mark. It fused instantly. No pain. Just warmth. And then, understanding. He looked up at the empty sky and smiled sadly. "I remember now." Then he walked into the ice. No one stopped him. The ice parted for him. As if the earth itself remembered him too. In New York, London, Cairo, and Beijing, chaos surged. Governments scrambled. Satellites watched. Scientists argued. But none of them understood what they were seeing. Not yet. Because they were thinking in terms of science. Of biology. Of invasion. But this wasn't any of those things. This was older. This was a reckoning. And it had been planned long before humanity had words for fear. Long before we called them myths. Long before we stopped singing. And somewhere, far beneath the earth, something stirred that had not moved in over 100,000 years. It was listening. It was waking. And it was hungry. The snow around the collapsed mountain had finally settled, but no one dared step closer. From above, it looked like a scar burned into the earth, pulsing faintly with a golden light. Satellite feeds showed the entire region humming with electromagnetic interference, the kind usually seen during solar storms, except the sun had gone quiet. Global scientists had no answers. Nothing added up. Instruments lied. Machines failed. And around the world, more and more people with spiral birthmarks were beginning to dream. Dr. Elias Tren was no longer buried beneath the rubble, but no one had seen him leave. A rescue team spotted strange footprints, bare, human, glowing faintly in the snow, leading away from the crater and vanishing into the trees. They followed the trail until it simply stopped, like the person had vanished mid-step. No body. No signal. Just heat still lingering in the snow. At the same time, far across the Atlantic, Commander Ilara Miles stood inside the war room of the Ascent, staring at the vessel in orbit. It hadn't moved since the last light pulse. But it had changed shape. The outer shell, once smooth like a perfect sphere, now unfolded into jagged angles, resembling the open petals of a dead flower. Beneath it, something glimmered. Not metal. Not machine. Something alive. She tightened her grip on the railing. "They're not ships," she whispered. "They're seeds." Behind her, the communications officer spoke up. "Ma'am, we just got a coded message from the Himalayan listening post. Audio only. Play it." The room filled with static. Then a child's voice, quiet, almost shy. "We didn't make them angry. We made them remember." The recording cut off. Everyone stood frozen. Across every continent, similar recordings began to surface. Scrambled transmissions from old monasteries, forgotten temples, isolated islands, each carrying fragments of the same message. Not just warnings. Instructions. But incomplete. Like the world had been handed pieces of an ancient puzzle, and the final shape was too massive, too terrifying to see all at once. Meanwhile, in the outskirts of a village in Mongolia, a woman named Nara sat in the dirt beside her son. He hadn't spoken since the first skylight, just sat staring up, hand clutching his chest like something inside him was changing. At night, he whispered names in a language she didn't know. She'd written them down and sent them to a linguist friend in Ulaanbaatar. The reply came quickly. The names weren't Mongolian, or Chinese, or Russian. They were from Proto-Ancestral root, a theoretical language scholars believed predated every known tongue. Nara didn't know what that meant. But her son began to hum again. And when he did, the trees around them bent slightly toward him. Like they were listening. In Egypt, Sammy stood inside the underground chamber, light from the carvings painting his face gold. His hands trembled as he traced the notes on the wall. It wasn't just a song. It was a map. A sound map, a sequence of tones that opened something beneath the ground. When they sang the melody together, the wall moved. Sand fell away, revealing another chamber. Inside was a sarcophagus. But not Egyptian. The markings were circular, etched in spirals and wings. Not symbols of death. Symbols of containment. Sammy's voice cracked. "We didn't bury our dead down here, we buried something worse." And when he reached out to touch the lid, it was warm. Even now. Even after thousands of years. As he backed away, the chamber darkened. And the humming began again, but this time it wasn't coming from him. It was answering. Back in orbit, Karavas reviewed the last decoded message from the alien vessel. The AI aboard Asteria had finally managed to translate the final glyphs. They read, "The gate will open. The song will return. And the gardeners will decide if the garden is worth saving." She couldn't breathe. All this time they had been watching. Waiting. Not to destroy. But to judge. She pulled up the transmission logs. The pulse from the moon wasn't directed at Earth. It was directed inward. Toward Earth's core. They weren't communicating with us. They were communicating with something already here. Something buried. And now it was answering back. At a secret installation deep beneath Colorado, General Marcus Reed pounded his fist on the table. "You're telling me we're in the middle of a global mythological meltdown, and our best defense is a lullaby?" Across from him, Dr. Lena Rourke didn't flinch. "It's not a song. It's a code. Something older than language. Passed down through blood and instinct. The human body, our genetics, was meant to carry it. You expect me to believe our ancestors fought off aliens with bedtime songs? They weren't bedtime songs. They were locks. And we were the vaults." Reed leaned forward. "And now the vaults are opening." Lena nodded. "And we don't know what's inside." At that moment, the power cut. Red emergency lights flooded the chamber. Alarms howled. "Unauthorized signal breach," someone shouted. Reed spun toward the console. "Where?" A tech called out, "South Pacific." "Sir, it's not a nuke. It's a gate." The image on the monitor showed the sea parting, a black shape rising slowly from the ocean floor, huge like a mountain breaking free. It had no engines, no weapons, just a single glowing spiral at the top, spinning slowly, pulling light from the clouds. The gate was open. People began to dream in sync. All across the world. Thousands, then millions. The same dream. A sky filled with fire. A city made of stone and memory. And a voice whispering. You had peace. You buried truth. You chose silence. Now the song returns. In every hospital, sensitive equipment spiked. Brain activity off the charts. Heartbeats sinking. Children woke up screaming. Old men cried and didn't know why. The song was reaching full volume now. And the world could no longer shut it out. On a quiet hillside in northern Scotland, an old woman stepped into the wind with her flute. She'd played the same melody every evening since she was a child, never knowing why. Her mother taught it. And her mother before that. Tonight, as she played it again, the ground beneath her feet shimmered. Rocks rearranged themselves. Spirals forming in the grass. The air shimmered. And a shape, half shadow, half light, rose behind her. She didn't stop playing. Even when it stepped closer. Even when it placed a hand on her shoulder. Because deep down she understood. This wasn't the end. It was the remembering. In a cave beneath the Andes, a man who had disappeared 15 years ago walked barefoot across the stone floor. His name was Alejandro, a linguist who vanished while studying ancient Quechua symbols. Now he returned. Older. Eyes glowing. Speaking no known language. But every time he opened his mouth, people stopped and listened. The air changed. Storms paused. Trees leaned in. And when he raised his hands and sang, just 3 notes, stone walls cracked open to reveal chambers no one had ever known existed. Inside were more songs. And warnings. And bones not quite human. In orbit, Ilara stared at the expanding vessel above Earth. A voice echoed through the ship's internal audio system. But it didn't come from outside. It came from within. A voice she recognized. Her mother. Dead for 20 years. You always asked what happened to the sky when you were little. Now you remember. It wasn't clouds. It wasn't storms. It was them. Watching. Waiting. Her knees buckled. It wasn't a message. It was a memory resurfacing from a time before birth. She crawled to the command console. Prepare all crews. Power down weapons. Bring up audio frequency 0.93 Hz. Commander? It's not a war we're facing. It's a test. She pressed the command. And from the ship's speakers, a melody began to play. One she hadn't heard since she was 6 years old. Her mother's lullaby. The same one echoing from the earth below. And the vessel above began to respond. Not with weapons, but with light. Spirals. Wings. And a heartbeat loud enough to be felt in every chest on earth. The climax was coming. But no one knew yet who would be judged worthy. And who would be left behind. The light from the vessel hadn't stopped pulsing. It beat like a slow, deliberate heart above earth, casting the sky in shifting hues, gold, deep crimson, strange violet. Birds flew in strange patterns. Ocean tides rippled with unnatural timing. People across the world stood in silence, watching, waiting, listening. Then all at once the signal changed. It wasn't music anymore. Not the song everyone had been hearing. It was screaming. Not loud, not painful. Just distant, like a memory crying out from the bottom of a well. Everyone who had been marked, those with the spiral birthmarks, those who'd been humming the song in their sleep, they dropped to their knees. Some wept. Some held their heads. Some stared up in terror as if recognizing something they had no words for. Commander Ilara Miles held the edge of the control panel on the ascent, trying to stay upright. The lullaby had stopped. Her mother's voice had faded. And in its place was something else. Something wrong. Commander, her second-in-command said, face pale, voice shaking, we're receiving new telemetry. The vessel's power signature is duplicating. Ilara blinked. Duplicating? Yes, ma'am. It's like another one is coming online. The screen flashed again. Another shape had appeared. Not in orbit. Below. Deep in the Earth's crust. Under Antarctica. Ilara's eyes narrowed. How long has it been active? About 3 minutes. And rising. Fast. Commander, this isn't coming from space. It's been here. She swallowed hard, heart pounding. They hadn't just been visited. They'd been growing something. Or guarding something. And it had always been under their feet. On the other side of the world, in a secure underground chamber below the Vatican ruins, where nothing was supposed to be left after the blackout, Dr. Lena Rourke and a handful of researchers stood inside a strange, oval-shaped room. Its walls pulsed with the same rhythm as the orbiting vessel. In the center of the chamber floated a seed-like structure, encased in crystalline amber. Cracked. Then again. One shard of crystal fell to the floor, and with it, a sound like a heartbeat echoed through the walls. Lena stepped back, eyes wide. It wasn't a seed. It was an egg. And whatever was inside, it wasn't asleep anymore. Meanwhile, deep under Antarctica, seismic readings went off the charts. Glaciers began to fracture. A massive fault line split open beneath a remote research base, swallowing buildings like they were made of paper. Survivors ran, screaming into the white void, only to be blinded by light rising from the chasm, gold and red, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the vessel above. Then came the voice. Not like the first one, wise, ancient, cold. This one was hungry, cruel, mocking. We were not the only ones who watched. Elias Tren woke in a cold sweat, curled under an abandoned tree somewhere far from the blast zone. His skin itched like it was being rewritten. He stared at his hands, veins glowing faintly under the surface. His memories were no longer his own. He saw glimpses of the past. Earth before humans. Cities made of bone and light. Creatures that walked on air and spoke in harmonics. Humanity wasn't born by accident. They were shaped, cultivated, tested. He had thought the vessel was the end of the story, the return of the Watchers. But now he saw there was something else. Something that had been locked away before time began. And now it was waking up too. The gardeners hadn't come alone. They had come to make sure the prison still held. And it didn't. Somewhere in the depths of South America, near the mouth of the Amazon River, a team of indigenous scouts stumbled upon a clearing they swore hadn't existed before. The trees were flattened outward in a perfect spiral. In the center, a stone disc spun slowly above the ground. As they approached, one of the younger scouts collapsed, eyes rolled back. He began speaking in a guttural, broken voice. "You broke the key. You opened the mirror." Then silence. The disc cracked in two. And a shadow rose. It didn't make sense what they saw. A creature made of angles, not flesh, like something designed in a nightmare instead of nature. The forest went still. The birds stopped. The sky dimmed. And one by one the scouts dropped their weapons and ran. None of them spoke again. But the spiral kept spreading. Trees died in perfect circles. Animals turned on each other. The jungle began to rot from the inside out. This wasn't part of the return. This was something else entirely. Something that had waited for the right signal. And now that signal had come. Back aboard the Asteria, Caravas stared at the scans coming from the Antarctic anomaly. The object buried there wasn't just waking, it was responding. To the signal. To the light. To the egg. "What is it?" she asked aloud, even though no one could answer. Then she noticed something. The spiral signature from the buried object. It was backwards. Not the same as the one in orbit. A reverse pattern. A mirror. That wasn't a second vessel. It was the enemy. One the first vessel had sealed away. One that humanity's myths had tried to erase. She turned toward her crew. "This isn't a return." They looked at her, waiting. "It's a war. And we were the battlefield." On Earth, panic spread. Cities flooded with people trying to leave. Governments broadcast calming messages that no one believed. The world was unraveling, not with fire, but with silence. No one wanted to say it. But everyone felt it. Humanity wasn't at the center of this story anymore. They were just one variable. And now they had to choose which side of the song to follow. In the dark edges of memory, something waited. Something born from silence, shaped by fear, forgotten by design. And now remembered far too late. The countdown had already begun. And the spiral kept turning. Elias moved through the forest like a man who didn't belong to his own body anymore. The air around him buzzed with a strange pressure, as if the world was holding its breath. He could hear the hum of the ship in orbit even this far from any equipment. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was a feeling like a chord being strummed inside his chest. The memories still came in flashes. Cities made of glass and shadow, wings stretching across the sky, spirals glowing across the earth like veins. Some of the memories weren't his. Some belonged to people long dead. And some hadn't happened yet. He stopped at the edge of a clearing. The trees here were bent outward in a perfect circle. At the center was a stone, smooth, cracked, humming. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the vessel above. A spiral carved into its surface began to glow as Elias stepped closer. He reached out and it responded, warm, alive. Then his head filled with voices. Not loud. Not words. Emotions. Fear. Warning. Urgency. And something else. Something deeper. A decision. He dropped to his knees, breath shallow. All over the world it was the same. In northern Greenland, the earth cracked open and released a blinding column of light that shot into the sky, connecting with the ship above. In the Amazon, the mirror spiral spread wider. The jungle screamed. Animals fled in every direction, eyes glowing with unnatural light. That buried vessel, the second presence, it had stopped pretending. It had begun to feed. Energy readings from every sensor went off the charts. Military bases in 3 continents picked up rising radiation signatures, but it wasn't from any weapon. It was biological, alive, evolving, and spreading fast. Back on the ascent, Ilara Miles stood frozen in the command bay, eyes locked on the growing shape above Antarctica. It was no longer underground. It had risen. And it wasn't just reacting to the signal from orbit. It was challenging it. 2 spirals, one golden and patient, the other twisted and chaotic, were now pulsing in direct opposition. The light from the original vessel had changed color. It wasn't soft anymore. It had deepened into a harsh white, almost flickering. Like something straining to stay focused. "Commander," her second said, voice shaking, "they're not just observing anymore." Alara already knew. They're preparing to engage. Across Earth the marked were responding. Not all at once, not like before. But this time it was different. Some collapsed. Some began to sing again. But others screamed. Blood from their noses, their eyes, their mouths. The spiral in their palms reversed. Spun the wrong way. And they changed. They turned. Not into monsters. But into something familiar and wrong. Like mirrors bent at the edges. In Istanbul, a marked woman stepped into a crowd and began to speak in a tongue that made glass crack and electronics fail. Everyone around her froze. Some bowed. Some ran. And when she raised her hands, a tear opened in the sky above them. Just for a moment. But enough to see what waited on the other side. Not a place. Not a ship. A wound. A living wound in the fabric of space, twisting like it hated being seen. And something inside it looked back. The gardeners had not come to rule. They had come to contain. But containment was no longer enough. On board Asteria, Karavas activated the ancient scroll hologram. The data translated line by line, symbols glowing with each new word. Her throat tightened as the final phrase appeared. "If the gate within awakens before the song is complete, the mirror shall fracture the world. And the judgment will not be kind." She looked at the command crew. "We're running out of time." And worse, the world didn't agree on what to do. Some wanted to fire. Others to worship. And most had no idea what was truly happening. In secret bunkers, leaders debated retaliation. But no weapon had locked onto either vessel. Targeting systems failed. Guidance chips shut down. The orbiting ship was untouchable. The thing below? Too deep, too alive, too fused with Earth. And then came the twist no one expected. The two spirals, one in orbit, one in Antarctica, synchronized. For just 1 second. All heartbeats on Earth paused. Clocks stopped. Birds dropped mid-flight. Even the wind stopped blowing. And then came the second pulse. The one that hit the moon. It wasn't visible. But it was felt. Every moon monitoring satellite shut down at once. Lunar sensors recorded a shockwave, deep, silent, impossible. And on Earth, children began to speak in voices not their own. "We remember the first garden," they said. "We remember what you did." Elias fell to the ground, screaming. Visions poured in like water through a broken dam. The first wars. Not between nations. But between songs. The spiral of growth, of order, of patience. And the spiral of chaos, of hunger, of silence. Humanity was not born neutral. They were made to choose. And now that choice had returned. Karavas screamed across the comms. "Some of the marked, they've gone rogue. They're being controlled by the second signal. We're losing them." Ilara's voice cut through the noise. "Then the infection is spreading." It wasn't a virus. It was resonance. Some bloodlines, some minds, carried more than just the melody. They carried the crack in the mirror. In Chile, a young boy marked with the spiral stood silently in front of a collapsing dam. People screamed behind him. The water roared. And he lifted his hand. The water stopped. It froze mid-air. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He wasn't himself. Then he turned to the nearest adult and said in a flat alien voice, "They are not here for your salvation. They are here to decide if your kind is worth saving at all." Then he vanished in a burst of light. No trace. Not even ash. The humans who still remembered the song, those who sang, who dreamed, who wept in rhythm, they began to feel it deep in their bones. The final verse had not yet been sung. But it was close. And whichever spiral completed the melody first, would reshape Earth. Not destroy it, but bend it, into one future, or the other. And the moment of that decision had already begun. The two vessels, one above, one below, now pulsed faster. Each call louder, sharper. Calling the blood. Calling the minds. And somewhere in the in-between a gate flickered. Opening. Waiting. The sky cracked open over the Pacific, not with fire, not with thunder, but with silence so heavy it made hearts skip. The two spirals, one golden, one dark, flashed like twin suns above and below the Earth. The whole planet seemed to pause. Time didn't stop, but it felt like the weight of everything, the history, the choices, the forgotten truths, had settled in the air. Elias stood at the edge of the glowing clearing, face pale, breath unsteady. His veins still pulsed with light, but it wasn't burning anymore. It felt like memory. A deep, aching memory rising to the surface of who he was. Around him, the wind bent trees outward again, spiraling in slow motion. The ground trembled under his feet. The stone in front of him, etched with the spiral, began to hum louder. It wasn't just responding to the sky anymore. It was calling something from inside him. He didn't know the words. Not exactly. But he began to speak anyway, voice low, shaky, filled with instinct older than language. And across the world, others joined him. The marked, the dreamers, the children and elders who had been hearing the hum in their sleep, feeling the pull in their bones. They didn't need translations. The melody was etched into the fabric of their being. Some sang. Some wept. Some screamed. But all of them were answering the call. Above, the orbiting vessel changed shape again. Its petals folded inward, revealing a core of light so bright it bathed half the earth in a second dawn. The ship was not a ship. It had never been. It was a beacon. A conductor. A trigger. It had waited not for the right time, but for the right voice. And now, Elias had become that voice. At the same time, the thing beneath Antarctica unleashed a final wave of resonance. The sky shimmered with patterns. A reverse spiral twisted up from the Earth's crust, black and jagged, like a shadow reaching to strangle the light. From its heart came forms, not bodies, not machines, but reflections. Human-like silhouettes made of smoke and memory, pulling screams from the air. The infected among the marked, those twisted by the false song, began to rise. Their eyes burned black. Their mouths whispered things no one could understand. But they moved like one creature, like a wave of static. They began to climb. Not just toward cities, but toward the sacred places. The ruins. The ancient sites where humanity's oldest stories had been whispered. Because that was the final step of the infection. Not conquest. Erasure. If the second spiral won, it would not rule over Earth. It would rewrite it. But even in the dark, humanity did not stop. In the deserts, in the forests, in frozen lands and burned cities, the true song surged. Mothers holding children began to hum. Old men with no teeth whispered the verses their grandmothers taught them. Soldiers on front lines sang through tears, clutching ancient pendants. Prisoners, poets, farmers, all adding their voices. Not in unity, but in defiance. The human heart remembered what fear had buried. We had not been protected by myths. We had survived because of them. Back on the Asteria, Caravas stood in front of the main console, voice raw from speaking the spiral pattern out loud. Every fiber of her being shook. She felt like she was coming apart and pulling together at the same time. The data stream confirmed it. Each note matched ancient harmonic frequencies buried deep in Earth's electromagnetic code. The spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a lock. And now it was turning. In orbit, the vessel's core split open, and a sphere of light dropped from its center, slow and steady, like a tear falling from the eye of the sky. It descended through the atmosphere, untouched by heat, by gravity, by resistance. It wasn't falling. It was choosing. Elias dropped to his knees as the light reached him. It hovered a few feet above the spiral stone. A perfect sphere of energy, spinning faster and faster until it became a blur. He didn't reach for it. It reached for him. The light poured into his chest like water through dry earth. He screamed. His body lifted off the ground. Not glowing. Breaking. Shattering. Becoming something more. In that moment the earth split. Not physically but spiritually. The golden spiral pulsed one final time. And the dark one answered with a roar that shook the clouds. The final note began. The pulse from Elias, now floating in midair, raced across the globe like a wave. Where it passed, the infected fell. Not dead. Not hurt. Just silent. Their eyes opened wide. Their mouths froze. And they remembered. For the first time. The infection hadn't erased who they were. It had only buried it. But now the truth broke free. The vessel below Antarctica let out a scream, one final broken sound that bled through every speaker, every bone, every thought. And then it collapsed in on itself. A spiral folding inward until there was nothing left. No shadow. No mirror. Just quiet. For a moment the entire earth stood still. No war. No chaos. Just a silence that held everything, loss, wonder, fear, awe. Elias fell to the ground, gasping. His skin no longer glowing. His veins no longer humming. Just a man again. Changed. Exhausted. Alive. The orbiting vessel began to dim. Its petals closed again, folding back into a perfect sphere. Then it drifted upward, higher and higher, until it vanished into the black. No explosion. No message. Just departure. But just when the earth began to exhale, when hope returned to tired hearts, one last twist arrived. A whisper. Not from the sky. Not from below. From inside the minds of the marked, it was the voice of a child. Soft, innocent, but not human. You sang the song. You passed the trial. But the garden is not yours alone. The whisper ended. But the meaning stayed behind like fog after a storm. Humanity had survived. But they weren't the only ones listening. Somewhere far beyond the stars, other gates were waking too. And not all of them would be kind. Elias lay on the forest floor, staring at the sky now empty of light. The golden vessel was gone, vanished without sound or fire. The strange music, the pulses, the voice inside his head, it had all fallen quiet. For the first time in days the air felt still. He was just a man again. Tired, cold, alive. His hands trembled as he pushed himself upright. The spiral in the clearing had faded, leaving behind only stone. No glow, no hum. Just earth. But he could still feel something deep in his chest like a second heartbeat. Not painful. Not frightening. Just different. He wasn't alone anymore. Far away in the control room of the Ascent, Commander Ilara Miles watched the final data streams fade off the screen. The vessel in orbit was no longer detectable. The dark energy signature beneath Antarctica had collapsed entirely, leaving behind a chasm of twisted rock and shattered ice. The infection readings were gone. No more interference. No more corrupted resonance. Everything had gone quiet. Too quiet. Her crew stood in silence. They didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. Something inside all of them knew that this wasn't the kind of battle you won with victory dances or waving flags. This was survival. Survival through memory, through instinct, through something ancient buried in human hearts. She leaned forward, her voice low. Broadcast to Earth. All channels. Tell them the storm has passed. Down on the planet, cities blinked back to life. Power grids surged. Satellites reconnected. People came out of shelters. Some cried. Some fell to their knees in the streets, overwhelmed. Not from fear, but from the strange peace that followed the storm. Hospitals reported that the marked, those who had hummed the song or carried the spiral birthmarks, had stabilized. No more seizures. No more glowing skin. Just quiet dreams. Some of them didn't even remember what happened. Others remembered too much. Across cultures there were stories told in whispers. Families gathered to speak of the visions, the memories, the voices. Elders who had forgotten old stories now recited them perfectly. Children who had never learned their native tongue began singing verses their ancestors had once feared to say aloud. And everywhere people began to draw spirals. In sand. In notebooks. On walls. Not as a warning. Not as a curse. As a reminder. In Cairo, Sammy stood before the cracked sarcophagus. The symbols inside were dark now, lifeless. The stone seemed to have aged 1,000 years overnight. It was over. The containment held. He stepped away, brushing dust off his jacket, but paused at the doorway. The chamber felt different now. Lighter. Like something had been carried out that no one could see. He whispered a quiet thank you, not to a god, not to a creature, but to the voices of the past, the ones who had left these markers. Not just to warn, but to guide. And humanity had finally listened. In a village outside Kyoto, Aiko sat on her porch, the pendant around her neck now warm like the sun. She rocked slowly, humming that old song again. The same one her mother taught her. The same one that had once made no sense. It was no lullaby. It was memory. One the world had buried for too long. The young girl sitting beside her joined in. Their voices mingled with the wind. Soft. Human. Together. In Chile, the boy who had stopped the dam came back. He walked out of the jungle barefoot, covered in dirt, eyes calm. He didn't speak right away, just sat beside the river and watched the water flow. When asked what he'd seen, he only said one thing. They showed me what we could become if we forget each other. And then he smiled. Now we remember. Back at the Vatican ruins, Lena Rourke stood in the empty chamber. The crystalline egg had dissolved into dust and nothing stirred. No voices. No hum. She sat on the stone steps and wrote in her journal. Not about science. Not about measurements or signals or waveforms. She wrote about how it felt. The quiet grief that followed the storm. The way her hands shook when she realized the world might never be the same. The way her heart still beat faster every time the wind moved in a spiral pattern. She wrote not as a scientist, but as a witness. At an emergency summit held weeks later, leaders from every major nation came together. Not to argue, not to assign blame, but to speak truth. The speeches were short. The recordings were simple. We weren't alone. We had never been. And somehow we had forgotten that the myths weren't warnings about monsters. They were memories of choices. Ilara stood before a global feed, looking into the camera not as a commander, but as a person who had seen both ends of the spiral. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed everything: fatigue, loss, hope. When the spiral came, we thought it was the end. But it wasn't. It was a reminder. A test. We stood at the edge of something ancient, something powerful, and we chose not to forget. She paused, letting the silence breathe. We passed the test. But we weren't the only ones watching. In the months that followed, the world changed, not with war, not with fear, but with slow, quiet reflection. People painted spirals on their homes. Children studied the song alongside math and history. Languages once considered dead were now taught again, not just for culture, but for memory. And science finally asked questions that had once only belonged to stories. Was humanity created? Were we cultivated? So by who? And for what purpose? The questions didn't have answers yet. But this time no one was afraid to ask them. As for Elias, he returned home. He didn't tell the whole story. Not because he couldn't, but because he knew the world didn't need every detail. What mattered was what came next. He spent most of his time near the mountains now, walking the forests where the stone had first hummed. He didn't glow. He didn't dream the same way. But sometimes when the wind was still, he felt the spiral turn again. Not in fear. In peace. And when a child passed by, he'd stop and ask, "Do you remember the song?" Sometimes they said no. Sometimes they said yes. But always their eyes sparkled, like something forgotten was beginning to wake again. It would take time. But that was okay. Because humanity remembered now. And that was enough. The gardeners had left without a word. No farewell. No warning. But their message had been heard, not through language or fire, but through the oldest thing humans still carried. A melody. A spiral. And a choice. To remember. To grow. To remain. And somewhere far beyond the edge of the solar system, in the dark between stars, other gates stirred. Other songs waited. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. Because now, Earth had joined the choir. And the next time the song returned, we wouldn't just survive it. We would understand it. And maybe this time we would sing first. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful sci-fi tales like this, full of emotion, mystery, and humanity, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We post original HFY stories that explore the strength of the human spirit in the face of the unknown. Tap the bell icon so you never miss an upload, and if this story moved you, leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and remember, in the vastness of the galaxy, our stories matter.